Howdy folks, it is Scanner here. In this video we're going to talk about another French Crusade mystery. These videos have done quite well on the channel. People seem to enjoy them. People seem to really enjoy jumping into the comment section with their own theories, which I also really like because some of you all have really interesting ideas and concepts as to what could be occurring in the world of French Crusade. And this week we're going to talk about the artifact. People are always wondering as to what that might be. I think there's more important considerations around the artifact as opposed to exactly what it is, and I think they can lead us to some really interesting places when thinking about the Trench Crusade universe. So, as most people will know, in the Trench Crusade universe in 1099, during the First Crusade, the Templars show up, they take Jerusalem, and they go beneath the streets, and there they find the artifact, and there they commit the act of ultimate heresy. That leads to an opening of the gates of hell, and from that point on, you have the world of Trench Crusade. So, there's some really important things to consider here. First of all, in the world of Trench Crusade, the gates of hell are literal. In the real world, the gates of hell are not literal. I've done enough research at this point to see that it's hard to find a religion that actually has a concept of a quote-unquote gate of hell that goes back any kind of distance and has any kind of anthropological merit. By and large, what's considered the gates of hell and what the gates of hell are supposed to represent for most religions is the passing of the soul into death. That's really kind of what they all boil down to. Over time and with the development of kind of sociological sin concepts and things like that, you've got this divergence where hell becomes a thing. The gates of hell become a potential physical manifestation. But for the most part, in the long form, they're really just about dying. There's no literal kind of gates of hell as far as most, if not all, religions are concerned. What that means is there can't really be, and there isn't really an object that is associated with opening a gate of hell. I kind of, checked in Christianity, which I was raised Catholic, so I had a strong concept as to what that's like. But there's other elements of Christianity I had to read up about. I looked into Islam, I looked into Judaism, I looked into all this kind of stuff, and nobody really seems to mention a thing that can open the gates of hell. So what that allows us to do in the Trench Crusade universe is ignore any kind of real world conceptualizing as to what that might be, whether it's a key or whether it's a stone or whether it's a gem or whether it's a chalice or whatever. And we don't have to worry about that kind of thing. We can kind of set our own concept as to what we would like that to be and what we think the developers might have done. Now, my personal take, just so you know, is I don't really know if Mike or Tuomas or anybody else has really cared to think about this one all that much, because I don't know if it's something that they ever really plan on explaining or ever really feel the point of explaining. I was talking to somebody I know on Twitter during the week who has done extensive writing in the video game industry, and his stance was that if you're explaining something, it's bad story. You need to leave room for people to imagine their things, and you can show and you can describe and you can kind of set things up to fall into place over time. But if you're basically giving what would be deemed an explanation of something, you're actually failing, and you should think about rewriting that part of the work. And I think that very much applies in Trench Crusade. So within the world of Trench Crusade, we can consider ourselves to have three potential origins of this artifact. This is what interests me, because of what those origins can mean. The origin can be, it can be man-made, which I don't think is the case. I don't think the world of Trench Crusade is going to, peel back and it'll be some kind of, you know, evil magic born of man, and you've got like some kind of occultist wizard who was trying to figure out how to open the gates of hell. And wouldn't you know it, he managed to make the thing that he needed, but he died before he got to use it, and it waited beneath the earth in Jerusalem all this time. I just don't think that was the case. And I don't think that's going to be the plot. You can have an infernal origin, which in Trench Crusade is tremendously interesting because there's all kinds of vested parties with different interests in how that might go. So let's kind of break down as to who might be doing what. And we'll need to roll back to this a little bit further down the line, but don't worry, it'll all make sense in the end. I try to make sure these always kind of tie themselves up in a neat bow. So you've got hell, and we know that hell is a very kind of split society. You've got all kinds of elements in there trying to get themselves into positions of power that we know of. We've got the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, and they are deemed like, you know, the head powers of the various mortal sins. And then you've got kind of Beelzebub, who exists outside of that power structure independently. You've got all the archdemons who can do all kinds of shit. And, you know, they're not far away from the court in terms of power, because they're the, you know, they're the people that the next elements of the court would come from. So you have this very like broad spread power interest and struggle ongoing. Then you've got the bigger fish, shall we say. We still don't know if the game is going to treat the Lucifer and Satan concepts as individuals or the same person. And if they are individuals, then where are they and what are they doing? You've basically got anybody who could be playing this long game. One of the things that I really like to think about is that kind of the society of hell had become somewhat stagnant, and there was a player in that game who was struggling to make progress. So what they did was they actually potentially placed the artifact. We know it's stated throughout the lore that they didn't need the gates necessarily to get into the earthly plane. There are openings, and there have been little openings and little places where reality is thin, and creatures from hell, particularly weak ones, basically, are able to go through because it doesn't cause any issues with the Covenant and all that kind of stuff. And that is why various cultures all throughout history have shared monster concepts. Everybody has zombies, and everybody has werewolves, and everybody has vampires, and, you know, there's all these kinds of beasts and creatures and things that are considered to exist all over the world. Like dragons is a great example. And that these could potentially be, in the Trench Crusade universe, explained away by these evil, maniacal, demonic creatures coming in and doing the bidding of their lords, or just their own bidding because they're bored. So that's potentially how the artifact gets there, if it's of infernal origin. I mean, just even related to the council, you can think of two people very definitely who might be interested in placing an artifact there that would give them access to Earth. You've got Mammon, who just loves riches, he loves stuff, and if there's one thing that Earth has, it's stuff. They've got precious gems, and they've got gold, and they've got art, and they've got tapestries, and they've got fine wines, and they've got glorious foods, and all this kind of stuff. Because what Mammon will be drawn to is the value placed on things by the coveted nature of people. People will covet things, it'll give them that value, and that value is what Mammon will seek. We see an echo of this in Beelzebub, who also could have placed the artifact there in an attempt to open the gate. You've got Beelzebub, who absolutely adores taking items that other people have worshipped. He loves shrines, and he loves crosses, and he loves temples, and he loves synagogues, to the point where he has them moved wholesale, brick by brick, and then rebuilt for himself in Ekron. the place is absolutely littered with objects and icons and things that other religions have worshipped and poured their faith into, and he feasts upon that latent faith, latent belief, latent power that's now in these things. So he would definitely want to get to Earth as well, because we know he has his own designs with the Black Grail. He's developed the Black Grail out of a sense of kind of pride after he got his ass whooped by God, essentially. God used a plague to show how powerless, essentially, Beelzebub was, and to punish his followers for their slights. So, there's two very, very powerful elements who could almost certainly have gotten the artifact in play and placed it there and then just sat back and waited. The consistent disconnect that I feel I have with some people in the Trench Crusade fandom, or dislike them, whatever you want to call it, is that I don't think hell really cares very much about time. If you're Beelzebub and you've got this plan in play, it took about 2.5 years or so to the timeline for hell from the time the gate is opened to genuinely get its shit together and make a concerted effort to get into the Levant and to really go for it. And it was, decades before Beelzebub made a concerted effort with the Black Grail, which is something he had been brewing all this time. That's a couple of minutes late as far as a eternal demon is concerned. It's not a big deal. We can't consider their time constraints the way we do for ourselves as individuals, as humans with this limited lifespan. They're essentially eternal. They don't care about that kind of stuff. So it could have been them. Their timing just might have been a little off. It could have been some kind of trickster. It could have been somebody on the outs who was really struggling to kind of make progress in the society of hell, and they needed to change things up. And they needed to de-stagnate the pond. They needed to give it an old swirl, and just that was their opportunity was basically going to be flux. They might be able to take advantage of the moment to better themselves. So it could have been them. It could have been any unknown, unnamed element in the entirety of hell, basically, who would have had the power to potentially do this. So that leaves everybody basically from the kind of major demons upwards might have managed to pull it off or figure out a way to do it or whatever. Or, as I said, we have no established lore or anything like that around Lucifer concepts, Satan concepts. Could have been them. They're absent. Maybe they just did it for the memes and rolled off and wanted to watch what would happen and see how it would play out. Maybe one of them, or both of them, or the combined of them is looking for a successor, and this was their way to do it. And maybe it's time for the next war in heaven, and this is how they plan on going about that. Now, there is another way that this whole thing could have started, and another origin that the artifact might have, and the origin of the artifact might be divine. Now, before people get mad about that as a concept, you've got a kind of a reasonable establishment of the idea of the end of days. I think most people will do, and I think people will be aware that in the Book of Revelations, that's essentially what's being described. Now, the Book of Revelations in and of itself is a tough nut to crack. There's a lot of different views on what that actually can be and how it plays out, and whether you're a kind of a preterist or a historicist or an idealist or a futurist or whatever kind of view you want to take of it. It's there, it's in the Bible. So I think it's fair game to discuss what this could actually mean. With regards to the Revelations and essentially the end of days, we have got the 7 seals, and 4 of those seals, the initial 4 of those seals, we can kind of look at them from the point of view of being the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So the first seal is a white horse, and it's often interpreted as meaning kind of conquest, Or one of the terms that I found when describing it that I thought was very, very interesting was this concept of false peace. And I really like the way that kind of feels in your brain, because the notion of a false peace implies that the only reason there's peace is because one side is unable to fight in that moment. And that is why there is a false peace. So if you want to look at kind of the apocalypse as being about hell versus heaven, the false peace could have been, the whole reason the war wasn't going on was just an inability to fight it. That hell perhaps really wanted another crack at the title, but they just had no way to fight it whatsoever. And the second seal is the red horse, symbolizing, war and bloodshed, and let's get it going. There's been huge periods of war and bloodshed throughout human history. You can that's almost a cheat when it comes to people who are into that kind of thing, because you can pick your poison. You can be like, oh, this is what, this was the second seal. This is what it means. And the third seal, the black horse, is famine. Once again, there's tremendous periods of famine throughout history. The one I wish to focus on, and the reason why I want to focus on this one in regards to Trench Crusade, is because it's interesting, and it's about what hasn't happened, not what has happened. So the fourth seal is the pale horse, and it means death and pestilence. And what we saw in the Trench Crusade universe with the opening of the gates of hell is that the armies of hell eventually start coming through. Lots of things start dying. You've got the unleashing of the Black Grail, all kinds of horrible diseases floating around the place. So there's that very particular moment in history in the Trench Crusade universe where the fourth seal could be broken. And it's in 1099. When that fucking gate opens, when all those demons start coming out, when all that shit starts to go down, you've got death and pestilence. And I don't know how to kind of break it to people here, but like the opening of the seals, and somebody please jump into the comment section and correct me if I'm wrong, but the opening of the seals is actually done by Jesus. It kind of states that he's the person who will do it because he died for our sins. That's the gain. And Jesus comes to earth, tries to save us all. We don't fucking listen because we're silly. Then he, is crucified, dies for our sins, goes to heaven, and then his next kind of thing is this 7 seal scenario where he's the one breaking the seals on this scroll, essentially is what it's about. And as the seals are broken, these things happen in real life. And I just think that would be a cool hinge moment. That 1099, when all that shit goes down, that is the breaking of the fourth seal. That's the pale horse. That's the death. That's the pestilence. And the reason why I think it's that one is because the fifth seal, this is where it starts to get a bit freaky, right? And it's harder for people to argue that this stuff has really happened. So the fifth seal is when the souls of those who were slain for their faith, they cry out. Kind of, they want justice. Who they want justice against is somewhat unknown, because most people who were crying out, their killers or their the people who persecuted them would be long gone basically by the time it gets to the cracking of the fifth seal, throughout history. The sixth seal, you've got the massive earthquake and the darkening of the sun and the moon, and we know that hasn't happened in the world of Trench Crusade. It hasn't been described, basically. And then the seventh seal, there's silence in heaven after the seventh seal. So, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking potentially, I don't want to say it's definitively divine of origin, but it's potentially endorsed, if you would. This is a thing that just has to happen. This is the Book of Revelations. This is the end of days. This is the way it's going in the Trench Crusade universe. Do I think that's the way that the devs are doing it? No, not at all. I just think it's a fun fucking conversation to have. So what the actual artifact is is far less important, I think, than where it actually came from. I don't think what the artifact actually is matters in the slightest. It could be anything. It can be whatever you want it to be. It can be a fucking really complicated Rubik's Cube. If you want it to be that thing, it can be a talon from a demon. It can be a broken piece of, a horn from Satan. It can be anything that you want it to be. I kind of focus more on what happened in that moment, what it means. The artifact itself was just a catalyst. It was potentially like a booby trap for whoever walked in there. It didn't matter who was going to walk in there. They were going to be like, there's going to be no way that they can overcome the temptations of it. And I think that's why I know some people get really angry about the notion of like, the Templars being the ones who did it. But for me, that just amplifies the tragedy that you've got that image of whatever was occurring historically is beside the point. You've got that image of people who are righteous and really very strongly believe in God, or at least that is what you think of. And they're the ones who are broken by it. I think that really amplifies the tragedy of that moment. And it's really more about the death of, as crazy as this is to say, they just like chopped their way to Jerusalem and taken the city. But it really is about the death of innocence on like just an enormous scale. Nobody will be born into the world again knowing the way it was before that moment, and that moment can never be returned to. I think there's something very interesting there in the writing and in the storytelling of Trench Crusade. Yeah, look, this video is already way too long. I'm going to stop talking. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to like and subscribe if you're not already, and keep an eye on your subscriptions tab for future videos from me. Thank you all so much for watching, and all the best. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Bye.